Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your session so far. Let's get rocking. We're excited to be here and to introduce you to these concepts because they're pretty abstract, so I'm hoping that we can bring them to center here. So to my left is Dr. Diana Pacheco, Guillermo Diaz, founder of Conectado, and Eric Sternbach. So nice to meet you all and meet you with these folks. I'm so sorry. So listen, here's what we like to do. So these guys all have really impressive resumes, and I would never do justice to sort of the background that they bring to the table. So what I'd love to do, as our founder likes to discuss, is the power of story. So if you could all please share your story. So tell us who you are, but also what brings you to this place? Like what's sort of your trajectory and why we're here?
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, and it's an honor to be here with my colleagues. My name is Diana Pacheco, born and raised in Honduras. I'm Dr. Diana Pacheco, yes, born and raised in Honduras, and I am an educator. I'm a teacher, and I became interested in design thinking and really how to incorporate design thinking into educational research. So I'm also, I like to think of myself as a social innovation strategist, into really looking at what's out there, what can we do to change it and to make it better, and really incorporating and like shaping the change that we want to see in our world. I completed my PhD in education, and one thing that I love being a researcher and an academic, but I always disliked the disconnect that sometimes it exists between the work that we do in academia and the work that is needed in practice. And that's what really motivated me to look for a job that would allow me to bridge those two, to bridge that gap into bringing rigor and research into creating innovative strategies and innovative solutions to the problems that we see in our world. And that's how I found Conectado. And Conectado allows me to really, conduct research that really brings in real solutions, that it's more fast-paced than what we can do in academia, and it's a fascinating place to be.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me here. My name is Guillermo Diaz. So why am I here is I actually, my story really started in a place called Pueblo, Colorado. My family's from Mexico, so I'm first generation. And, my journey really started with not having a lot of means to get educated. So going into and learning this stuff in the U.S. Navy, in the military, is where I started, but I learned about this real cool thing called technology. And when I got out of the Navy, I ended up in this really cool place called Silicon Valley, which was the right place at the right time, and ended up growing my career here in the Valley at big companies like a company called Silicon Graphics, SGI, and most of my career at Cisco Systems, where I was the CIO for many years. And, but at the same time I was doing that, I also found that I needed to think about where I came from and the culture and the fact that in my community there were not a lot of people that looked like me, and not a lot of especially in technology. And so with that, I also created inside of organizations inclusion and diversity efforts like an ERG, or Employee Resource Group. And I also connected with the broader community. And so those three things, really leveraging technology, the internal inclusion, belonging and diversity efforts, with the broader community, those threads, I wanted to be able to connect the dots. So if you think about the term conectado is how do we connect those efforts? And so that's why we really that's why I'm here.
Hi, Eric Sternbach. So I started, at least in my digital career, in a company called GoTo.com, which changed names to Overture. Eventually was acquired by Yahoo, which is now kind of, at least with GoTo and Overture, kind of an asterisk on the history of the internet. But GoTo.com was actually the company that started pay-per-click advertising. So we started it from the very beginning with penny per click, and people thought it was a horrible idea until Google copied it, and they did a really good job copying it. And they went on to be pretty successful in terms of monetizing through pay-per-click. But it was interesting just kind of growing up and seeing kind of a very working for and competing against other Web 2.0 companies and watching that growth trajectory, which was just absolutely amazing to watch. But you also see the good and you also see the bad. From there I transitioned. I worked for a ad network company that worked out really well for me because we had a liquidity event, and then I went in terms of a startup to Tapatalk, which is a mobile app really focused on online communities. But again, it was very focused on Web 2.0, which is very centralized. And more recently, I started being an advisor to Metaverse, which is taking the idea of online communities and bringing that with using Web3 technology.
Very nice. So the importance of story is, it's critical for us to understand where are people coming from, right? How does that shape our trajectories or our intentions, our objectives? So the kind of format that I'd like to do today is just kind of go what's, why, how, and then regarding the how is what are the implications of that, what are the limitations, what are the affordances, and what's next for this readiness. Of course, our panel is titled, Are We Ready for Web 3.0 and the Metaverse? And so Eric, I'll direct the first question to you, which is, what is Metaphoro, right? What is the what, right? And what makes it a Web3 community protocol?
Yeah, so Metaphoro is a native Web3 platform for online communities. So Web3, and you could probably have a lot of different definitions, but what I'll say is that the whole idea is around decentralization, and in the sense of the community, where it's community owns the content. They have full ownership versus a centralized entity. For example, like in an online community today, Facebook is a great online community, but it's clearly controlled by Facebook. Same thing with a Reddit or a subreddit is great communities, but they're centrally controlled. Or traditional online forums is owned by a forum owner who has people kind of join, but it's controlled by one person whose interest may not be the same as what the community feels how it should be. So by going to Web3, it's really about the community owning and controlling the content rather than a centralized entity.
Gotcha. So how do you think about the concept of decentralization, and why is it so important that the community own the content?
Yeah, so as we thought about even, creating Conectado, we thought about, well, where's this next generation coming from? They're already gamers, they're already streamers, they're already in this world. Let's meet them where they're at. But it was even more important than that. It was like, but why is it this cool technology? But why are we doing it in the first place? And so the why really for us is, how do we make sure that we're looking at the insights and the social, the economic, and the generational impact that we're looking to make, and that the technology, as Eric was talking about, would be the accelerator. Like and let's just give you an example. In the Latino community, I don't know if you realize this, but K through 12 students in California, they got 56% of those students are Latino. And they're already gamers, they're already streamers. They're the users, but they're not necessarily the makers. So what we wanted to do is figure out a way to create Because if you think about the world where it's going, the world has become digital. We learned that in the last 3 years. If we haven't figured that out, the world has become way more digital than we were before. So now, how do we look at the reasons the Latino community is it's decentralized by nature. We talk about being centralized, but it's really not. There's different cultures, even in the Latino community. So how do we then leverage the technology, the insights and the concepts to be able to go how, not just the how, but why are we doing it? Why are we making an effort to raise more of these next generation leaders into this digital world, and how are we using the platform to do that?
Yeah, that's super helpful. What I'd love to hear more of too is when we talk about community, like how would you define community, especially in these new spaces, right? So how is technology helping to bring people together in a way that maybe the in-person environment doesn't? How are you thinking about creating these communities, both on the technical side, but also in terms of the user experience, right? The more humanistic interactions that might happen in these virtual spaces. Diana, maybe you could talk more about how you are conceptualizing spaces, right, in Conectado, or the Conectado-verse.
Yeah, sounds good, but let me take a step back so that our audience is more acquainted with what Conectado is. So Conectado is a Web3 virtual destination that brings together educational institutions, corporations, and nonprofit organizations all come to work together to increase representation of Latinos in tech. Like Guillermo was explaining, we see at Silicon Valley, for example, almost up to 50%, right, of K-12 students identify as Latinos, but only 4% of the workforce in high tech identify as Latinos. So we see that as a problem, right, in many ways. But what we're trying to do is understanding the phenomenon, understanding like why this happens, and that has a lot to do with the community in itself. So the interesting thing about Web3 is that it's given us back the power, right? And of joining communities that are important to us, that we can share values and mission. It's a purpose-driven communities. And when we're starting to think about how we are engaging with the internet and what we can do now, especially as we're moving towards Web3, is the ability of ownership, is the ability of really being an actor in these communities. So what we are trying to do, what we are doing in Conectado is really building a community that will allow us to navigate what we call an activity system. Well, activity system, we're referring to basically any an activity system can be your workplace, it can be the field of technology, but a lot of elements interconnect in this activity system and ultimately give us a desired outcome. So the way that we're designing Conectado is we want it to be an activity system where individuals can come as a community, they can find the tools that they need to pursue a career in STEAM, or more specifically in tech, if that's of their interest. What kind of community support do we need in terms of mentors, in terms of peers, in terms of representation, and seeing others like you that are doing things that you might feel inspired to follow. And we're conceptualizing Conectado as a community for spatial justice, really trying to build a community where individuals can access fair, equitable distribution of resources and opportunities that we don't necessarily find in the physical world. Because if you think about it, a lot of what shapes on how you think about yourself and what you can do and what kind of career you pursue has a lot to do with your environment, what your parents do, what your neighbors do, what your peers do, and that really nurtures and inspires what you can be. But if you're not seeing any of that around, you don't have the kind of community, you don't have that kind of support, it's really hard to pursue that. So we're building that community that in many cases individuals don't have in the physical world. world, right? And that they can also enact and be meaningful actors within this community, when they can have ownership. And that's how we're conceptualizing community in Conectado, a community that really lifts each other up and that facilitates the resources that might be available to us in this space.
Awesome, thank you. I think the audience will soon want to be like, what does this look like? But before we go there, Eric, I'm curious, you talk a lot about like these transitions between Web 2.0, Web 3.0, and then what does that look like in terms of people being able to own content, right? Can you tell us like, where are the gaps? Like when we talk about are we ready, like what do we need? What are sort of, the resources still needed to be in place, both the technical side and maybe even the human side?
Yeah, there's clearly some gaps. Web3 right now, at least from what we're seeing, especially at Metaphoro, is really focused on essentially crypto projects. And the reason is the ideal of a decentralized community or DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, that's the whole idea around Web3. But the technicalities around how you do that are still really tough, because that's why it's really just kind of almost like a crypto audience, because the concept of NFTs. So the concept of whether you're NFTs or SBTs, and how you a wallet to have to connect this wallet to be able to vote, and these are very difficult concepts for most people. So I think from a technology standpoint, how do we make the Web3 concept of a decentralized community work as easy as a Facebook group does? So I think that's clearly one of the gaps. And I think one of the central tenets of any DAO or decentralized community is going to be around governance, and who kind of makes kind of decisions, which is kind of token based, which again is going to be a concept that's going to be difficult for people to conceptualize. But if you think about it as owning shares in a company without the regulatory issues around raising money, but just kind of you actually own a share of this community, and the way you contribute to it might be in terms of participating in events. It might be in terms of how you contribute content, whether written or verbal or written or visual or other types of content, and you get rewarded, so you really feel that piece of ownership. And then as a community, you can decide what are the next steps that we want to take in terms of moving forward. So proposals can be made, and the community can vote, and that voting can be based on the tokens that you've earned through the contribution. So it doesn't have to be just financial contributions that allow you to feel a part of ownership of this community.
So I feel like we need something more tangible, maybe to visualize what we're all talking about here. So would now be a good time to show the trailer?
Yeah, let me start with just kind of piggybacking off of what Eric is talking about is, we're still learning our way through what is, because some people go, well, Web3, the Metaverse is Metaverse and Web3 the same thing, right? Because the way we look at it is the Metaverse is the experiential piece of that, is how we're going to actually navigate and experience this world. Where Web3 really is kind of like the underlying, from our perspective, the underlying fabric that is not only going to create the ledger of how we're moving and navigating this world, but also let's just take a student. As a student goes through this, how do they experience where I need to go and what educational resources are available to me? When I get a certification, where does that go? We have this concept of think about ways for your career or ways for your journey. It's like, if I'm going through my journey, are there recommendations to go left or right or keep going straight? And then when I get that certification, can I create that digital backpack that now creates a ledger that says, okay, now you have starting to build your resume, right? And but who do I need to connect with? Do I need to talk to and see the Diana Pachecos who have been there with me, who have been there before? How do I latch that on? So there's an interaction between what we believe the metaverse, the experiential piece, the Web3, the data, and how the data gets captured and ledgered, etc. And then there's still these things called NFTs, right? What are the kinds of things that I can do when I'm in there? So I think we're still kind of like defining our way through that. But I do want to just share real quick what it looks like, if you don't mind, Will.
And then let's go deeper into the how, once everybody gets a chance to see. What does it look like, or what can it look like? This is Conectado. Do we have sound for that? So let's dig more into that. Eric, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on these kind of metaverses, right? What does it take for people to enter into this world? So Conectado is a place where people are supposed to come in and they're like, I want to be a machine learning engineer. And I have no idea what to do because I'm the first in my family to go to college and I don't know what courses I should take. I don't know anybody who's done this before. I'm really lost. And so can you point me in the direction? And so Conectado is supposed to have, the Bill.coms, the Apples, the Googles there, where you can have internship experiences, where you can go to the School of Education at Berkeley or at Stanford Graduate School of Business and collect certifications, where you'll meet, where you'll meet different mentors or make the relationships that enable you to navigate this virtual space and collect these sort of digital tokens that enable you to, it's like this merger between the physical and the virtual space. And so it feels still very just intangible. And so as someone who's really thinking about these more technical aspects of being able to make this work, right? So it's robust to have these kinds of user experiences. How are you doing this work in Metaforo and sort of what does it take? Can you get more into the how for us on the technical side?
Sure. Well, I think to avoid the technical, because it should just happen almost
we shouldn't feel the technical.
Right,
yeah.
Because if you're feeling the technical, I think that's going to be the biggest barrier. But essentially, it's creating a community is no different than the concept of what has been done in the past in terms of an online community or online forum. So creating a digital community for Conectado, and where people could ask the question. So you simply create a topic, like I'm interested in this specific subject, how do I go about it, here's the questions. People can respond in terms of connecting with the Apples, the Googles, the Metas of the world in terms of a mentor and having a common resource where they can just communicate. Behind the scenes, what's happening is all those conversations are now stored decentralized. As the community continues to build and in terms of next steps of how it wants to approach another entity, someone can make a proposal and the proposals can be voted on by the members. And how many votes you get, right, is going to be based on the contributions you have made to the community. So you can earn credits and you get more voting power. So you really get the sense of community because together you're deciding how you want to move forward. So it's not some central entity kind of saying here's how things have to be done. You decide as a community. Does that help?
I think so, yeah. And then Diana, thank you so much. And then Diana, I would love for you to elaborate on more of the how, right? Like we're coming into a place where the virtual and the physical world are blending together. So how are you thinking about designing the user experience, right? And how they're coming into Conectado, navigating this space, and then taking the benefits of that then benefit them in their physical spaces. Like how are you thinking about that in terms of also access and inclusion and equity? Because you talked about spatial justice before.
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to organize my time. So, at the very center, our approach is human-centered. We're always thinking about the needs of the user. It's like the how sort of accounts like as an afterthought, right? As we're building our community. And we're doing it through really doing a lot of research and understanding what does it mean, for example, to belong. Because one of the biggest aspects of pursuing a career has to do with science identity. And really engaging with this concept, what does it mean to have a science identity and have a sense of belonging and really building social capital and cultural capital. There are things that really influence how we navigate the world. So we're really looking at the experience in the physical world and what enables us or really are obstacles for us to access those resources. So a deep understanding of those elements of human interaction, of access, of what motivates you, what's your motivation, how the mentorship occurs, what are the basic elements of a mentorship relationships, why and how does representation affect our perceptions of ourselves. So really understanding the human experience as it comes on decision making around a career or about growing your career if you're already a professional. And looking at all those different elements and really digitizing that experience without forgetting the human element. Because at the core, yeah, there's a lot of technology, yeah, there's a digital community, but at the core of it is how do we interact? How do we build relationships that really have a lasting effect in the quality of lives and the decisions that we make? So that's our approach. It's a human-centered approach to how we can really leverage technology to improve lives.
Guillermo, this one's coming to you. So we're talking really about the how, right? And we see the sort of the conceptual or what the user experience might be, and then there's the sort of technical background that supports people's ability to interact with that space. So what are the implications of that? What are the limitations, right? And I think, Eric, if you want to speak to that as well. And what are the affordances of what we have so far that will start to help us get us there into our next steps?
Yeah, I think the cool thing is that, you know, especially probably everyone in this room, they understand the technology side, right? They're the gamers, the streamers, the social. So a lot of these technologies are being used every single day. So being able to meet them where they're at. I still think if you look at there seems to be a lot of controversy of, you know, is the metaverse a real thing? Is it really going to happen? Is meta strategy working? I mean, you know, something came out yesterday on, you know, is it just a big game? So there's still a lot of things, and Eric, you'd love to get your insights here, but I mean, there's still a lot of things that need to be ironed out, especially around, you know, what are the behaviors, the policies, the procedures on you know, when I enter the metaverse, what are the rules?
Right.
And I still think that is something that that we're working through. And as we go through this, it will be like agile, it will be iterative, we'll have to learn, but what we want to be able to do is go in there with the principles and the policies that we want to make this place a better world. We want to create an environment where people can thrive and find their opportunities. We want to create an environment where people can create that community and get credentialed and get, so it's a big new world that I think is still being defined, right?
Growing, what is it, building the plane while flying it. Well, part of it might be on fire. So tell us more about how Metaphoro is thinking about this and what are the challenges, limitations, affordances you all are working through.
Sure. I think one of the challenges, because the whole concept of a decentralized community sounds wonderful, but in practice, you need someone to still be a leader, but begin to get things put together. So I think you need some centralization at the beginning, because otherwise, if everyone's waiting for someone else to get started, nothing ever happens. So I think you need some level of centralization at the beginning in a decentralized community. But the rules can, one of the features of a decentralized community is going to be that it's self-governance. So you can decide what the rules are now in terms of how you're going to govern what this community is going to do and how it's going to move forward and what projects it's going to take on and how we're going to get more people involved in our community. Those are all voted on by the members. Maybe at the beginning it's a concentrated number of members who earn their tokens to be able to take that on, with the idea that over time we're going to decentralize to get more and more people involved. So the key here is that the rules aren't being written in terms of how the community is going to be run by any one individual or any entity. It's going to be put together by the community itself. So I think that's one of the key differences in a Web3 environment, is that it's self-governing rather than being governed by a single individual or an entity. But someone's got to, the genesis has to start somewhere with some centralization. That makes sense.
Yeah. For me, I'm hearing democratized co-construction.
Yes, that's a nice thing.
Okay.
Democratized co-construction.
So we're building something together right now.
Absolutely. And
We're co-constructing
and
the
we're
future.
going to co-own this in the future too, because the community owns it. And to the extent that there's any value that's being created, it's being, the community gets to share in that value rather than a third party.
So why does this matter? Like, why is this really important for the future that we can possibly create? In terms of communities, in terms of what people get to do, life chances, etc.
Yeah, I mean, online communities have been around for a long time, and prior to that they were offline communities, so I think it still matters. And I think the biggest difference is that the value in a community is now going to belong to the community itself. The value that it's creating, where instead of that third party, that corporate entity or a single individual. And that's going to create even more of a sense of ownership to make the community successful in terms of however it defines what success is.
But I also think, I think from my perspective, I think there's a big demographic or demographics that by nature they've been underrepresented, but in many ways, it's a cultural thing. And now with this, with decentralization, I can actually, let's say, for example, you've seen some of the art in what you saw. Like some of these artists, I had a conversation with a young woman in Tucson, Arizona. So the art that you see in that digital form is actually a physical mural in Tucson, Arizona. And I have the conversation saying, did you know that could ultimately become maybe an NFT in this new world. He had no concept of what an NFT was. But a beautiful art form could, you know, I mean, we're seeing many of these NFTs being sold for millions of dollars, while, you know, there's these underrepresented communities are creating beautiful things that they haven't been connected to this new digital world, because it's happened, and people are benefiting from it. So what we want to be able to do is also expose that to others that have been underrepresented and underexposed, so that they can see the opportunities. So I think for us, there's the technical side of it, but there's also the social and the you know, how do you expose more of these opportunities to these communities, right?
Thank you. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Diana?
I really like what you said, Guillermo, about the underrepresented voices, and that's the huge opportunity of these decentralized communities, right? That you don't have to ask for space from a centralized authority. We can create our own, and in that there's a lot of power. There's a lot of power because it's given us the ability to say what matters in our community, to create things that matter, and to be co-constructors of these environments in something that matters for us. And especially with Gen Zers, like mission is a big component of why people join jobs, right? Or why people are joining communities. And that's a big part of Web3, is really joining communities that matters and building upon them and being co-owners and just existing within those spaces that we think might make a difference, or that they're really valuable to who we are.
Okay, so I think we have 4 minutes left, and with our last 4 minutes, I'd love to play future forecasting with you. 5 years' time, what is your vision for what the metaverse will look like? And in between now and that vision, what is needed? Eric, I'll start with you since you started us.
So I see DAOs continuing to...
And DAOs are?
Decentralized autonomous organizations. The other term that I mentioned, which I think is even more exciting, is DSOC is another one I've heard, Decentralized Societal Organizations. And really having those begin to take off and people feel that they can really belong to a specific community and are welcomed and their contributions are valued, and they get a piece of ownership along the way. And ownership can mean a lot of different things. To get there, we need to remove the technology barriers that make it difficult to understand how you do this, and it just happens almost behind the scenes, and because people understand the idea of voting. So you know, this whole concept of governance can be really complicated, but they can understand voting, and making those whole concepts very simple for everyone to understand, so that everyone can participate.
Nice, thank you. Guillermo.
Yeah, so I know I always joke about this, but I've been through Web 1, 2, and now, and I've seen them happen. Web 3 is going to happen. Metaverse is going to happen.
Whether we're ready or not. Huh?
Change will happen by us, with us, or to us. So we want to make change happen by us, with us, and some of it will happen to us. But I think if we focus on how do we make it easy? How do we make that experience easy? How do we make it, how do we follow and make sure that we're driving the outcomes? And how do we create the community and bring that community together? I think if we make it easy, and that's what our aim is. It's not just create like a cool, like Lego blocks. No, we got to make it easy. We got to make it cool, and we have to make it outcome driven. And I just think that's why I decided that I'm going to move my career in this direction.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I got 1 minute. And so, Diana, I'm going to let you have the last word. But what I'm hearing here, and I'll let you kind of finish this line is that, oftentimes I think we navigate the world and we think life happens to us. We don't realize, that we participate in the systems and the structures that shape our lives. And it sounds like we really need to understand, develop the knowledge, right, to wrap our head around the concept that we can co-construct together. And there's power in that, right? So what's your last word on the vision for the future?
That it's an exciting moment to engage with Web3, learn about it, and create and become co-constructors and finding our own communities, things that matter to us and where we can really push forward into creating better communities and therefore better society.
And with that, thank you everybody for your attention. We appreciate your time.